When I lost my job, I moved in with family just for a month, I said. They smiled to my face and gossiped when they thought I wasn't listening. She's always been a leech. She'll never make it. I heard every word. I said nothing. 3 years later, their company applied for a grant, and they had no idea who'd be reviewing it. What I wrote on the rejection letter? Let's just say they remembered every word they once said. I moved in just for a month. That's what I told them when I called, voice low, rehearsed, pretending not to care about the silence that followed on the other end of the line. I said it casually, like I had options. Like I wasn't calling because I had just boxed up my desk and handed in a badge that stopped working the week before. Of course, my aunt said. You know you're always welcome. I knew I wasn't, but I didn't say that. I packed 2 suitcases, left the rest behind. Told myself it was temporary, a pause, a reset. Just enough time to find my feet again, send out resumes, breathe without counting down to rent. They greeted me at the door with smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. The kind of welcome that feels practiced. Hugs that ended too fast. Questions that skimmed just above the surface. Rough market out there, my uncle said. Don't stress, my cousin added. You'll land something. They cleared a room that had been storage. Blew up an air mattress. Said I could stay as long as I needed, then reminded me it was only for a little while, before I even unpacked. I nodded, said, thank you, smiled. Sat on the edge of the bed that wasn't mine and promised myself I'd be out before they noticed the weight of me. But they noticed fast. They noticed in the way they closed doors just a little more often. In the way conversations stopped when I entered a room. In the way dinners grew quieter, tighter, as if I'd brought in a draft no one wanted to mention. It was supposed to be 1 month. A month of breathing room. But even in that first week, I could feel the air getting thinner. They smiled to my face, asked how the job hunt was going, told me not to worry, said things like, you're smart, something will come along. My aunt brought me tea in the evenings. My cousin offered to print my resume at her office. They were nice. They were helpful, until they weren't. Until the door clicked shut too lightly after dinner. Until I passed the hallway and heard the wrong part of my name. Until I lingered too long at the top of the stairs and realized they didn't lower their voices nearly enough. She's still here, that was my cousin. She says she's applying, my uncle replied. But all I ever see is her scrolling. They laughed, the kind that fills a room when no one thinks you'll hear it. She's always been soft, someone said, too delicate for real pressure. I don't know what she thought would happen. I stood there barefoot frozen, not surprised, just adjusted. That's what you do when people change the moment they think you're out of range. You adjust. You learn to take up even less space. You learn not to speak unless asked. You learn to make your gratitude louder than your grief. The next morning, I smiled when they smiled. Said thank you when they handed me breakfast. Nodded when they asked how I was doing. And I didn't mention what I'd heard the night before, because they weren't wrong. I was still there. And that seemed to be enough for them to forget I had ears. She's always been a leech. That's what my uncle said one night. I was walking past the den, not eavesdropping, just heading to the kitchen when I heard it. Crisp, final. Like a diagnosis. They were watching something on TV. The sound was low, a documentary or some political special. My aunt was folding laundry. My cousin sat scrolling on her phone. She just drains a room, he added. Takes and never really gives anything back. My aunt sighed, not defensive, not surprised, just tired. She was always like that, even as a kid, always needed help. Always needed saving. She's not a bad person, my cousin said. She's just directionless. Entitled, my aunt corrected. They weren't angry. That was the part that stung. They sounded bored, like they'd had this conversation before. Like it was just a routine check-in on the person in the spare room, the one who couldn't quite get her life together. They didn't whisper. They didn't look over their shoulders. Because to them, I wasn't even worth hiding it from. I stood in the hallway, stomach clenched, hands at my sides. I didn't cry. I didn't walk away. I just listened, quietly, carefully, as 3 people who shared my last name confirmed what I had suspected since the day I arrived. To them, I wasn't family. I was a burden. She'll never make it. That was the sentence that landed hardest. It came from my cousin, of all people. The one who once asked me to edit her college essays. The one I picked up from parties at 2 a.m. without complaint. The one who used to tell people I was basically her sister. She's not built for it, she said. She's always been fragile, you know. They all murmured their agreement. The TV was still on, some scene playing out where someone else was failing. They laughed at that, too. I mean, she continued, I give it another year max. Then she'll be back here again. Probably asking for help with some certification program or weird side hustle. My aunt sighed, God forbid. My uncle said nothing, just changed the channel. It wasn't even a debate, they spoke like it was fact. Like the future had already happened and I had failed in it. Like I was a cautionary tale in progress. A long, drawn-out disappointment wearing borrowed pajamas and drinking their filtered water. They didn't know I was in the hallway again. They didn't know how still I had learned to be. I went back to my room, that cold, spare space with the air mattress and the buzzing lamp, and I sat on the floor with my back against the door. I stared at the blank wall and let the words roll through me, she'll never make it. They didn't say it with venom, they said it with certainty. And somehow that was worse. I wanted to leave right then. Pack my bags, walk out. Take the train to anywhere. Sleep at a station if I had to. Just get away from their voices, from their smirks. From the sense that every breath I took inside that house was measured, tracked, and counted against me. But I had nowhere else to go. No job, no savings, no backup plan. The economy was still a mess, interviews rare, responses rarer. I'd already applied to everything within 3 zip codes and half the city beyond. And pride doesn't pay for rent, so I stayed. I ate their food, I thanked them for it. I asked how their day was and nodded when they didn't ask about mine. I cleaned up after myself. I kept my door shut. I wore headphones even when I wasn't listening to anything, just to have a reason not to talk. I folded my dignity into small, manageable pieces and tucked it into my pocket like loose change. And I planned. Silently, strategically, I made spreadsheets, applied for scholarships, started free courses online, wrote cover letters until the words lost meaning. I turned every insult into fuel, every backhanded comment into a notch on a list I never said out loud. Because if they were going to watch me like a burden, I'd make damn sure they never saw the moment I became more than one. I said nothing, not when they called me brave for going on another interview, knowing they thought it was pointless. Not when they asked how I was doing, in that tone people use when they're really asking how long until you're gone. I just smiled, I said, I'm good, thanks. And I let them believe it, because silence, I learned, was its own kind of armor. It made them underestimate me, kept them soft, relaxed, smug, and I needed that. I needed them comfortable enough to stop paying attention, to stop looking for signs that I was still climbing. So I became invisible. I left the house early, returned late, ate after they finished, laughed politely at the TV shows I didn't watch. I let them think I'd given up because that's what they expected. And I never gave them what they expected. They never saw the textbooks under my bed, the midnight emails, the virtual interviews I took sitting on the floor with my laptop propped up on a crate. They didn't know I was already enrolled in a new program, that I was freelancing quietly, that someone had just offered me a role, part-time, remote, flexible, with a foot in a door they didn't even know existed. They didn't know because I didn't tell them. I owed them silence, and I paid in full. I got a job, then another, then more. It started with contract work, small projects no one would brag about, but each one built on the last. I taught myself everything I didn't know, asked better questions, learned how to pitch without apology. 2 months in, I was balancing 3 clients. 6 months, and I was full-time again, not with one company, but with 5. Consulting, writing, reviewing, researching. I built my own structure from the pieces no one else thought to pick up. I finished a certification, then a second, then a post-grad diploma I didn't tell anyone about, paid for it myself, printed the certificate, and slid it into a drawer. My name started showing up in credits, in acknowledgments, on pages that used to be reserved for other people. People who never had to earn back their dignity one invoice at a time. I didn't post about it, didn't announce the new title, the new email signature, the steady income that no longer flinched at rent. I kept it quiet, because success didn't need to be loud, not for them. They never asked where I went during the day. Never asked how I afforded new shoes. Never noticed the shift in posture, in tone, in how I carried myself. They were too used to not seeing me, and I was too used to building in the dark. I moved out without a word. No dramatic goodbye, no tearful thanks. No sit-down dinner where I promised to stay in touch. I packed my things in silence, the same 2 suitcases I arrived with, plus a few extras I'd bought with money they didn't know I earned. They were at work the day I left. I cleaned the room, deflated the air mattress, took out the trash, left the key on the kitchen counter beside a folded note that said nothing, just my name, written in ink they wouldn't bother to read between. I didn't owe them anything. Not an explanation, not a story, not a single line of gratitude for surviving a house that only ever tolerated me. I caught a rideshare to the new place. It was smaller than I wanted, older than I could afford long-term. But it was mine. No one watched when I came home. No one tracked how long I stayed in the shower. No one commented on how late I ate, or what I wore, or if I smiled enough to prove I was okay. I set up my desk by the window, hung up a cheap corkboard, pinned a goal list I didn't share with anyone, and I breathed. For the first time in a long time, the air didn't come with judgment, just quiet and freedom. I didn't speak to them for years, and they never noticed. No calls, no texts, no emails, no "how are you?" No "where did you end up?" Just the same silence they once wrapped around me like a blanket and called kindness. I stopped sending birthday messages, stopped reacting to their photos, stopped pretending there was a relationship to maintain, and nothing happened. They didn't reach out. They didn't wonder why, because in their minds I was a footnote, a brief inconvenience who had the decency to disappear quietly. I'd done exactly what they hoped I would, left without making them feel guilty. The distance grew like dust on furniture, slow, quiet, only obvious if you went looking for it. They didn't, and I didn't offer reminders. I built my world, slowly, cleanly, without them in it. I made friends who asked how I was and waited for the real answer. I said yes to dinners, to partnerships, to conferences where my name started appearing on panels. I got a new number, a new address, a new version of myself that didn't include their opinions. I passed their names sometimes on emails, on LinkedIn, once in a trade newsletter. I'd skim past. No anger, no ache, just recognition. And then I'd keep scrolling, because forgetting them wasn't the point. But needing them, that part ended a long time ago. I took a job they'd never understand. Program oversight, grant funding, review and distribution. I worked with data, strategy, measurable impact. Things that didn't make sense at holiday tables where people still thought consulting meant unemployed. It was quiet work, but important. Decisions that moved money. Evaluations that shaped futures. I read proposals from startups, nonprofits, research groups, reviewed budgets down to the decimal, checked citations, credentials, context. I didn't post about it. Didn't update my extended family, just kept building. My name was on files now, approvals, denials, assessments. I sat in rooms with people who said things like, "We trust your judgment." I gave feedback that shaped entire departments. Some weeks were slow, some were stacked with deadlines, but every week I had authority, and it never felt loud. It felt earned. When people asked what I did, I kept it simple. I review funding applications. Most didn't ask further. That was fine, because the power wasn't in the title. It was in the fact that, for the first time, I didn't need anyone to understand it but me. 3 years later, their name crossed my desk. I blinked twice, thought it was a glitch. The organization listed in the top left corner of the application, bold, uppercase, proud, was theirs. My aunt's consulting initiative, as she once called it over dinner while explaining how some people just aren't built for leadership. There it was, a full proposal. Grant requested $48,000. Purpose, community development and financial literacy outreach. Lead contact, my cousin, same last name, same smile in the attached bio photo. I sat still for a full minute. Not angry, not amused, just still. They had no idea. No idea that the woman they once whispered about behind closed doors now held the pen. No idea that the person they dismissed with smirks and certainty now reviewed proposals like this for a living. No idea that the life they were hoping to build with this funding sat in the hands of the leech they once let sleep on their floor. I flipped the page, read it again, and smiled, not because of what was coming, but because they had just walked straight into the one room they never imagined I'd be in. I read their proposal word for word, every line, every metric, every promise of impact and sustainability. The buzzwords were all there: empowerment, scalability, underserved communities. It was neatly packaged, well formatted, desperate. They needed the grant, that much was clear. The project timeline was tight, the staffing minimal, the projected outcomes vague. The numbers didn't match the goals. The budget assumed things that hadn't been priced. There were placeholder texts still in the footnotes, insert testimonial here. But I didn't roll my eyes. I didn't smirk. I reviewed it the way I was trained to, critically, logically, fairly, because despite everything they once said, I am built for this. I annotated the margins, flagged inconsistencies, checked their credentials against public databases. I treated their application the same way I treated the other 72 that came in that month, until I hit the final paragraph. A personal note from the founder, my cousin. This work is personal to me. I know what it means to struggle, to feel overlooked. I've seen what a second chance can do. We just need someone to believe in us. I stopped there, read it again, and again, not because it moved me, but because I remembered where I'd heard that tone before. It was mediocre at best. The kind of proposal that might slip through on charm or connections, but never on merit. Inflated outcomes, vague objectives, outdated strategy. A handful of buzzwords pasted onto a skeleton of good intentions. I could have rejected it on policy alone. The gaps were clear. The budget breakdown didn't hold. The partnerships they listed hadn't submitted letters of support. There was no clear plan for measuring impact, and the language read more like a college group project than a serious initiative. I flagged the sections that failed, filed the notes, pulled up the rejection template we use for standard denials: polite, neutral, direct. But something made me pause, not vengeance, not bitterness, just memory. Of the way they laughed when I lost everything. Of the way they shook their heads and said I'd never make it. Of the way they packed my presence into a corner and called it temporary. And now, here they were, asking for a chance. Begging on paper for the kind of belief they'd never offered anyone else. Especially not me. I could have sent the form letter. But I didn't, because this one needed a signature. Understood. Here's a reworked version of Part 14, no placeholders, no soft punches, no choppy structure. Just clean, sharp prose that fits the tone you've set. I took my time writing the rejection letter. Addressed it properly, to the founders of Hartwell Consulting, even though I knew exactly which kitchen table that name was built at. The rest unfolded line by line, cool and controlled. I outlined the reasons without excess: insufficient documentation, unclear outcome measures, budget inconsistencies. I included a note on alignment, how their proposal didn't meet the priorities of this grant cycle. Professional, standard, but every word had weight. I didn't overplay it. I didn't need to. They would read it once and feel confident enough to fight it. Then they'd read it again, slower. Because the language I used, it wasn't aggressive. It was familiar, just formal enough to pass as routine, just sharp enough to land. I didn't insult them. I didn't echo their tone from years ago. I simply held up a mirror and made sure the reflection was crystal clear. Then I signed my name, neat, full, unmistakable. Then I added one final line. Just before the signature, right at the bottom of the page, where the I lands last and lingers longest. Some people just aren't built for leadership. That's all, no quotes, no attribution, just the sentence. The same one my aunt muttered 3 years ago over grilled chicken and condescension, when she thought I was too tired, too broken, too invisible to remember. They would. The moment they read it, they'd remember exactly where they said it, what they were wearing, who else was in the room, the way they laughed after. They'd feel it like a tap on the shoulder from someone they didn't know was still behind them. I didn't add anything else. Didn't circle the phrase, didn't underline it. Let it sit there, quiet, sharp, surgical. They'd read the letter twice because of that line, 3 times. Then they'd look at the name at the bottom of the page, and everything would stop. I signed it with my full name, No title, no department. No abbreviations. Just the name they used to whisper when they thought I was a burden. Bold, centered, clean. The same name my cousin laughed at when she said I'd be back in 6 months, maybe a year. The same name my aunt rolled her eyes at when I said I was applying for roles they didn't understand. The same name that sat in silence for months at their dinner table, swallowing their pity like it was grace. Now it sat at the bottom of a rejection letter. Permanent, unapologetic. They wouldn't need to look it up. They wouldn't have to ask around. That name would hit like memory. Because for all their assumptions, all their certainty that I would fade into nothing, it was that name they would stare at when they realized just how far I'd gone. And just how far behind they'd been left. The call came fast. Not even an hour after the rejection hit their inbox. My phone lit up with a number I hadn't saved but recognized instantly. The area code, the rhythm of it, the way my uncle's office line always ended in 2 zeros. I let it ring. It stopped. Then again, this time my aunt's cell. Then my cousin's, 3 calls back to back, no voicemail. The fourth one left a message. It was her voice, thin, breathless, suddenly full of warmth I hadn't heard since I'd arrived at her doorstep with a suitcase and nowhere else to go. "Hey," she said. We got your note, just wanted to talk, maybe catch up." A pause, crazy how things turn out, huh? No mention of the proposal. No mention of the line I wrote. Just that jittery, cracked version of small talk people use when they're trying to pretend the fire behind them isn't still burning. She stammered, laughed once, forced. "We should talk, soon." Then silence. They'd called because they realized. Because for the first time they understood who they'd dismissed. And because now they needed something, I pressed delete. I didn't pick up. Not the first time. Not the 5th. Not the 10th when they tried from a blocked number, thinking I wouldn't notice. I watched the screen light up, ring out, go silent. Then again, and again. I didn't even feel tempted. Because I'd heard everything I needed to hear years ago through thin walls, closed doors, voices that only softened when they thought I was too far away to care. Now they were the ones on the outside, trying to reach in, and I had nothing left to give. No explanations, no forgiveness, no space for revision. I let the calls stack up, watched their names flash and vanish. Messages filled with vague apologies, forced laughter, sudden interest in how I was doing. They'd had their chance to speak, back when I needed a reason to stay, back when I would have believed anything they said. Now, they were just noise on a line I no longer answered. I filed the letter and went back to work. Just another rejection. Another folder in a system full of them, some fair, some disappointing, some like this one, personal without ever needing to say so. I clicked complete review, moved their file into the closed archive, logged the timestamp, checked the next name on the list. Nothing lingered, no rush of revenge, no spike of adrenaline, just a quiet, steady sense of balance. I sipped my coffee, typed out feedback for the next proposal, sent 2 follow-up emails, approved a payment for a nonprofit that was doing the work. I didn't tell anyone on my team, didn't smile any wider than usual, didn't slow my pace or pause at the window like something monumental had happened. Because to them, it hadn't. It was just work, just another file. But in my chest, in the place that used to house shame, then silence, then resilience, there was calm. Not because I'd gotten even, but because I no longer needed to. They remembered what they said. So did I, but only one of us regrets it. I walked past my team that afternoon, clipboard in hand, inbox half cleared, already thinking about the meeting I had in 15 minutes. Someone called my name, asked if I had time to review a final draft. I said yes without stopping. Because this is who I am now. Not the girl who whispered thanks just to stay in the room. Not the woman they laughed at when they thought I wasn't listening. Not the placeholder they expected to vanish. I'm the one who stayed the course, who sat in silence and built a life so solid, no insult could shake it. They said I'd never make it. I never said a word in return, but I signed one, and that was enough. Thank you for watching. Please do not forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. I love you all.